I'm Pat Tully of the Ketchikan Public Library, and this is Reading Aloud. This evening I'm going to read some early letters of Jane Austen to her sister Cassandra. Jane Austen was born in 1775 to a middle-class English family that struggled to make ends meet. Jane had several older brothers and an older sister named Cassandra. Jane began writing at the age of 12 and read her stories aloud to family and friends. She did not have her first novel, Sense and Sensibility, published until 1811, when she was 36. And Jane Austen died after a long illness in 1817, aged 41. Scholars estimate that Austen wrote some 3,000 letters over her lifetime. All but 161 were destroyed by her sister after Jane's death, presumably to spare the feelings of relatives, friends, and neighbors. So the letters that are left are a very mild version of what was probably the original collection. But there are still flashes of the acid wit and original observations that distinguish Jane Austen's novels. So let's get started. The first letter was written in 1796 when Jane was 20 years old. Steventon, Thursday, January 16th, 1796. I have just received yours and Mary's letter, and I thank you both, though their contents might have been more agreeable. I do not at all expect to see you on Tuesday, since matters have fallen out so unpleasantly, and if you are not able to return till after that day, it will hardly be possible for us to send for you before Saturday, though for my own part I care so little about the ball that it would be no sacrifice to me to give it up for the sake of seeing you 2 days earlier. We are extremely sorry for poor Eliza's illness. I trust, however, that she has continued to recover since you wrote, and that you will be none of you the worse for your attendance on her. What a good-for-nothing fellow Charles is to bespeak the stockings. I hope he will be too hot all the rest of his life for it. I sent you a letter yesterday to Ibthorp, which I suppose you will not receive at Kingsbury. It was not very long or very witty, and therefore, if you never receive it, it does not much signify. I wrote principally to tell you that the Coopers were arrived and in good health. The little boy is very like Dr. Cooper, and the little girl is to resemble Jane, they say. Our party to Ashe tomorrow night will consist of Edward Cooper, James, for a ball is nothing without him, Buller, who is now staying with us, and I. I look forward with great impatience to it, as I rather expect to receive an offer from my friend in the course of the evening. I shall refuse him, however, unless he promises to give away his white coat. I am very much flattered by your commendation of my last letter, for I write only for fame, and without any view to pecuniary emolument. Edward is gone to spend the day with his friend John Lyford, and does not return till tomorrow. Anna is now here. She came up in her chaise to spend the day with her young cousins, but she does not much take to them or anything about them, except Caroline's spinning wheel. I am very glad to find from Mary that Mr. and Mrs. Fowle are pleased with you. I hope you will continue to give satisfaction. How impertinent you are to write to me about Tom, as if I had not opportunities of hearing from him myself. The last letter that I received from him was dated Friday 8th, and he told me that if the wind should be favorable on Sunday, which it proved to be, they were to sail from Falmouth on that day. By this time, therefore, they are at Barbados, I suppose. The Rivers are still at Minniedown, and are to be at Ashe tomorrow. I intended to call on the Miss Biggs yesterday, had the weather been more tolerable. Caroline, Anna, and I have just been devouring some cold souse, and it would be difficult to say which enjoyed it most. Tell Mary that I make over Mr. Hartley and all his estate to her for her sole use and benefit in future, and not only him, but all my other admirers into the bargain, wherever she can find them, even the kiss which C. Powlett wanted to give me, as I mean to confine myself in the future to Mr. Tom Lefroy, for whom I don't care sixpence. Assure her also, as a last indubitable proof of Warren's indifference to me, that he actually drew that gentleman's picture for me and delivered it to me without a sigh. Friday. At length the day is come on which I am to flirt my last with Tom Lefroy, and when you receive this, it will be over. My tears flow as I write at the melancholy idea. William Chute called here yesterday. I wonder what he means by being so civil. There is a report that Tom is going to be married to a Lichfield lass. John Lyford and his sister bring Edward home today. Dine with us, and we shall go together to Ashe. I understand that we are to draw for partners. I shall be extremely impatient to hear from you again, that I may know how Eliza is, and when you are to return. With best love, etc., I am affectionately yours, J. Austen. Cork Street, Tuesday morning, August of 1796. Dear Cassandra, here I am once more in this scene of dissipation and vice, and I begin already to find my morals corrupted. We reached Staines yesterday. I do not know when, without suffering so much from the heat as I had hoped to do. We set off again this morning at 7 o'clock, and had a very pleasant drive, as the morning was cloudy and perfectly cool. I came all the way in the chaise from Hertford Bridge. Edward and Frank are both gone out to seek their fortunes. The latter is to return soon, and help us seek ours. The former we shall never see again. We are to be at Astley's tonight, which I am glad of. Edward has heard from Henry this morning. He has not been to the races at all, unless his driving Miss Pearson over to Rowling one day can be so called. We shall find him there on Thursday. I hope you are all alive after our melancholy parting yesterday, and that you pursued your intended avocation with success. God bless you. I must leave off, for we are going out. Yours very affectionately, J. Austen. Everybody's love. Rowling, Monday, September 5th. My dear Cassandra, I shall be extremely anxious to hear of the event of your ball, and shall hope to receive so long and minute an account of every particular that I shall be tired of reading it. Let me know how many, besides their 14 selves and Mr. and Mrs. Wright, Michael will contrive to place about their coach, and how many of the gentlemen, musicians, and waiters he will have persuaded to come in their shooting jackets. I hope John Lovett's accident will not prevent his attending the ball, as you will otherwise be obligated to dance with Mr. Tinkton the whole evening. Let me know how J. Harward deports himself without the Miss Briggs, and which of the Marys will carry the day with my brother James. We were at a ball on Saturday, I assure you. We dined at Goodestone, and in the evening danced 2 country dances in the Boulangerie. I opened the ball with Edward Bridges. The other couples were Louis Cage and Harriet, Frank and Louisa, Fanny and George. Elizabeth played 1 country dance, Lady Bridges the other, which she made Henry dance with her, and Miss Finch played the Boulangerie. In reading over the last 3 or 4 lines, I am aware of my having expressed myself in so doubtful a manner that if I did not tell you to the contrary, you might imagine it was Lady Bridges who made Henry dance with her at the same time that she was playing, which, if not impossible, must appear a very improbable event to you. But it was Elizabeth who danced. We supped there, and walked home at night under the shade of 2 umbrellas. Today the Goodestone party begins to disperse and spread itself abroad. Mr. and Mrs. Cage and George repair to Hythe. Lady Waltham, Miss Bridges, and Miss Mary Finch to Dover, for the health of the 2 former. I have never seen Mary Ann at all. On Thursday, Mr. and Mrs. Bridges return to Danbury. Miss Harriet Hales accompanies them to London on her way to Dorsetshire. Farmer Claringbould died this morning, and I fancy Edward means to get some of his farm, if he can cheat Sir Brooke enough in the agreement. We have just got some venison from Gomersham, which the 2 Mr. Harveys are to dine on tomorrow, and on Friday or Saturday the Goodestone people are to finish their scraps. Henry went away on Friday as he proposed, without fail. You will hear from him soon, I imagine, as he talked of writing to Steventon shortly. Mr. Richard Harvey is going to be married, but as it is a great secret, and only known to half the neighborhood, you must not mention it. The lady's name is Musgrave. I am in great distress. I cannot determine whether I shall give Riches half a guinea or only 5 shillings when I go away. Counsel me, amiable Miss Austen, and tell me which will be the most. We walked Frank last night to Crickshole Rough, and he appeared much edified. Little Edward was breeched yesterday for good and all, and was whipped into the bargain. Pray remember me to everybody who does not inquire after me. Those who do, remember me without bidding. Give my love to Mary Harrison, and tell her I wish, whenever she is attached to a young man, some respectable Dr. Marchmont may keep them apart for 5 volumes. Rowling, Thursday, September 15th. My dear Cassandra, we have been very gay since I wrote last, dining at Nackington, returning by moonlight, and everything quite in style, not to mention Mr. Claringbold's funeral, which we saw go by on Sunday. I believe I told you in a former letter that Edward had some idea of taking the name of Claringbold. But that scheme is over, though it would be a very eligible as well as a very pleasant plan, would anyone advance him money enough to begin on. We rather expected Mr. Miles to have done so on Tuesday, but to our great surprise nothing was said on the subject, and unless it is in your power to assist your brother with 500 or 600 pounds, he must entirely give up the idea. At Nackington we met Lady Soane's picture over the mantelpiece in the dining room, and the pictures of her 3 children in the anteroom, besides Mr. Scott, Miss Fletcher, Mr. Toke, Mr. J. Toke, and the Archdeacon Lynch. Miss Fletcher and I were very thick, but I am the thinnest of the 2. She wore her purple muslin, which is pretty enough, though it does not become her complexion. There are 2 traits in her character which are pleasing. Namely, she admires Camilla, and drinks no cream in her tea. If you should ever see Lucy, you may tell her that I scolded Miss Fletcher for her negligence in writing, as she desired me to do, but without being able to bring her to any proper sense of shame. That, Miss Fletcher says, in her defense, that as everybody whom Lucy knew when she was at Canterbury has now left it, she has nothing at all to write to her about. By everybody, I suppose Miss Fletcher means that a new set of officers have arrived there. But this is a note of my own. Mrs. Miles, Mr. John Toke, and in short everybody of any sensibility inquired in tender strains after you, and I took an opportunity of assuring Mr. J.T. that neither he nor his father need longer keep themselves single for you. We went in 2 carriages back to Nackington, but how we divided I shall leave you to surmise, merely observing that as Elizabeth and I were without either hat or bonnet, it would not have been very convenient for us to go in the chaise. We went by Bifrons, and I contemplated with a melancholy pleasure the abode of him on whom I once fondly doted. We dined today at Goodestone to meet my Aunt Fielding from Margate and a Mr. Clayton, her professed admirer, at least so I imagine. Lady Bridges has received very good accounts of Marianne, who is already certainly the better for her bathing. So His Royal Highness Sir Thomas Williams has at length sailed, the papers say on a cruise. But I hope they are gone to Cork, or I shall have written in vain. Give my love to Jane, as she arrived at Steventon yesterday, I dare say. I sent a message to Mr. Digweed from Edward in a letter to Mary Lloyd, which she ought to receive today. But as I know that the Harwoods are not very exact as to their letters, I may as well repeat it to you. Mr. Digweed is to be informed that illness has prevented Seward's coming over to look at the repairs intended at the farm, but that he will come as soon as he can. Mr. Digweed may also be informed, if you think it proper, that Mr. and Mrs. Miles are to dine here tomorrow, and that Mrs. Joan Knatchbull is asked to meet them. Mr. Richard Harvey's match is put off until he has got a better Christian name, of which he has great hopes. Mr. Children's 2 sons are both going to be married, John and George. They are to have one wife between them, a Miss Holwell, who belongs to the Black Hole at Calcutta. I depend on hearing from James very soon. He promised me an account of the ball, and by this time he must have collected his ideas enough after the fatigue of dancing to give me one. Edward and Fly went out yesterday very early in a couple of shooting jackets, and came home like a couple of bad shots, for they killed nothing at all. They are out again today, and are not yet returned. Delightful sport. They are just come home, Edward with his 2 brace, Frank with his 2.5. What amiable young men. Friday. Your letter and one from Henry are just come, and the contents of both accord with my scheme more than I had dared expect. In one particular I could wish it otherwise, for Henry is very indifferent indeed. You must not expect us quite so early, however, as Wednesday the 20th. On that day se'nnight, according to our present plan, we may be with you. Frank never had any idea of going away before Monday the 26th. I shall write to Miss Mason immediately, and press her returning with us, which Henry thinks very likely, and particularly eligible. Buy Mary Harrison's gown by all means. You shall have mine for ever so much money, though, if I am tolerably rich when I get home. I shall like it very much myself. As to the mode of our traveling to town, I want to go in a stagecoach, but Frank will not let me. As you are likely to have the Williams and Lloyds with you next week, you would hardly find room for us then. If anyone wants anything in town, they must send their commissions to Frank, as I shall merely pass through it. The tallow chandler is Penlington, at the Crown and Beehive, Charles Street, Covent Garden. Miss Austen, Steventon, Overton. Rowling, Sunday, September 18th. My dear Cassandra, this morning has been spent in doubt and deliberation, in forming plans and removing difficulties, for it ushered in the day with an event which I had not intended should take place so soon by a week. Frank has received his appointment on board the Captain John Gore, commanded by the Triton, and will therefore be obliged to be in town on Wednesday, and though I have every disposition in the world to accompany him on that day, I cannot go on the uncertainty of the Pearsons being at home, as I should not have a place to go to in case they were from home. I wrote to Miss P. on Friday, and hoped to receive an answer from her this morning, which would have rendered everything smooth and easy, and would have enabled us to leave this place tomorrow, as Frank, on first receiving his appointment, intended to do. He remains till Wednesday merely to accommodate me. I have written to her again today, and desired her to answer it by the return of post. On Tuesday, therefore, I shall positively know whether they can receive me on Wednesday. If they cannot, Edward has been so good as to promise to take me to Greenwich on the Monday following, which was the day before fixed on, if that suits them better. If I have no answer at all on Tuesday, I must suppose Mary is not at home, and must wait till I do hear, as after having invited her to go to Steventon with me, it will not quite do to go home and say no more about it. My father will be so good as to fetch home his prodigal daughter from town, I hope, unless he wishes me to walk the hospitals, enter at the Temple, or mount guard at St. James. It will hardly be in Frank's power to take me home. Nay, it certainly will not. I shall write again as soon as I get to Greenwich. What dreadful hot weather we have! It keeps one in a continual state of inelegance. If Miss Pearson should return with me, pray be careful not to expect too much beauty. I will not pretend to say that on a first view she quite answered the opinion I had formed of her. My mother, I am sure, will be disappointed if she does not take great care. From what I remember of her picture, it is no great resemblance. I am very glad that the idea of returning with Frank occurred to me, for as to Henry's coming into Kent again, the time of its taking place is so very uncertain that I should be waiting for dead men's shoes. I had once determined to go with Frank tomorrow and take my chance, etc., but they dissuaded me from so rash a step as I really think on consideration it would have been. For if the Pearsons were not at home, I should inevitably fall a sacrifice to the arts of some fat woman who would make me drunk with small beer. Mary is brought to bed of a boy, both doing well. I shall leave you to guess what Mary I mean. Adieu, with best love to all your agreeable inmates. Don't let the Lloyds go on any account before I return, unless Miss P. is of the party. How ill I have written! I begin to hate myself. Yours ever, J. Austen. The Triton is a new 32 frigate just launched at Deptford. Frank is much pleased with the prospect of having Captain Gore under his command. Bull and George, Dartford, Wednesday, October 24th, 1798. My dear Cassandra, you have already heard from Daniel, I conclude, in what excellent time we reached and quitted Sittingbourne, and how very well my mother bore her journey thither. I am now able to send you a continuation of the same good account of her. She was very little fatigued on her arrival at this place, has been refreshed by a comfortable dinner, and now seems quite stout. It wanted 5 minutes of 12 when we left Sittingbourne, and from whence we had a famous pair of horses, which took us to Rochester in an hour and a quarter. The postboy seemed determined to show my mother that Kentish drivers were not always tedious, and really drove as fast as cacks. Our next stage was not quite so expeditiously performed. The road was heavy, and our horses very indifferent. However, we were in such good time, and my mother bore her journey so well, that expedition was of little importance to us, and as it was, we were very little more than 2 hours and a half coming hither, and it was scarcely past 4 when we stopped at the inn. My mother took some of her bitters at Ospring, and some more at Rochester, and she ate some bread several times. We have got apartments up 2 pair of stairs, as we could not be otherwise accommodated with a sitting room and bedchambers on the same floor which we wish to be. We have 1 double-bedded and 1 single-bedded room. In the former, my mother and I are to sleep. I shall leave you to guess who is to occupy the other. We sate down to a dinner a little after 5, and had some beefsteaks and a boiled fowl, but no oyster sauce. I should have begun my letter soon after our arrival, but for a little adventure which prevented me. After we had been here a quarter of an hour, it was discovered that my writing and dressing boxes had been in accident put into a chaise which was just packing off as we came in, and were driven away toward Gravesend in their way to the West Indies. No part of my property could have been such a prize before, for in my writing box was all my worldly wealth, £7 and my dear Harry's deputation. Mr. Notley immediately dispatched a man and horse after the chaise, and in half an hour's time I had the pleasure of being as rich as ever. They were got about 2 or 3 miles off. My day's journey has been pleasanter in every respect than I expected. I have been very little crowded and by no means unhappy. Your watchfulness with regard to the weather on our accounts was very kind and very effectual. We had 1 heavy shower on leaving Sittingbourne, but afterwards the clouds cleared away, and we had a very bright crystal afternoon. My father is now reading Midnight Bell, which he has got from the library, and mother sitting by the fire. Our route tomorrow is not determined. We have none of us much inclination for London, and if Mr. Notley will give us leave, I think we shall go to Staines through Croydon and Kingston, which will be much pleasanter than any other way. But he is decidedly for Clapham and Battersea. God bless you all. Yours affectionately, J. A. I flatter myself that Edie Dorkey will not forget me at least under a week. Kiss him for me. Steventon, Saturday, October 27th. My dear Cassandra, your letter was a most agreeable surprise to me today, and I have taken a long sheet of paper to show my gratitude. We arrived here yesterday between 4 and 5, but I cannot send you quite so triumphant an account of our last day's journey as of the first and second. Soon after I had finished my letter from Staines, my mother began to suffer from the exercise or fatigue of traveling, and she was a good deal indisposed. She had not a very good night at Staines, but bore her journey better than I had expected, and at Basingstoke, where we stopped for more than half an hour, received much comfort from a mess of broth and the sight of Mr. Lyford, who recommended her to take 12 drops of laudanum when she went to bed as a composer, which she accordingly did. James called on us just as we were going to tea, and my mother was well enough to talk very cheerfully to him before she went to bed. James seemed to have taken to his old trick of coming to Steventon in spite of Mary's reproaches, for he was here before breakfast and is now paying us a second visit. They were to have dined here today, but the weather is too bad. I have had the pleasure of hearing that Martha is with them. James fetched her from Ibthorp on Thursday, and she will stay with them until she removes to Kintbury. We met with no adventures at all in our journey yesterday, except that our trunk had once nearly slipped off, and we were obliged to stop at Hartley to have our wheels greased. Whilst my mother and Mr. Lyford were together, I went to Mrs. Ryder's and bought what I intended to buy, but not in much perfection. There were no narrow braces for children, and scarcely any nodding silk. But Miss Wood, as usual, is going to town very soon, and will lay in a fresh stock. I gave 2s. 3d for a yard of my flannel, and I fancy it is not very good, but it is so disgraceful and contemptible an article in itself that its being comparatively good or bad is of little importance. I bought some Japan ink likewise, and next week shall begin my operations on my hat, on which you know my principal hopes of happiness depend. I am very grand indeed. I had the dignity of dropping out my mother's laudanum last night. I carry about the keys of the wine and closet, and twice since I began this letter have had orders to give in the kitchen. Our dinner was very good yesterday, and the chicken boiled perfectly tender. Therefore I shall not be obliged to dismiss Nanny on that account. Almost everything was unpacked and put away last night. Nanny chose to do it, and I was not sorry to be busy. I have unpacked the gloves and placed yours in your drawer. Their color is light and pretty, and I believe exactly what we fixed on. Your letter was chaperoned here by one from Mrs. Cook, in which she says that Battle Ridge is not to come out before January, and she is so little satisfied with Cawthorne's dilatoriness that she never means to employ him again. Mrs. Hall of Sherborne was brought to bed yesterday of a dead child, some weeks before she expected, owing to a fright. I suppose she happened unawares to look at her husband. There has been a great deal of rain here for the last fortnight, much more than in Kent, and indeed we found the roads all the way from Staines most disgracefully dirty. Steventon Lane has its full share of it, and I don't know when I shall be able to get to Deane. I hear that Martha is in better looks and spirits than she has enjoyed for a long time, and I flatter myself that she will now be able to jest openly about Mr. W. The spectacles which Molly found are my mother's, the scissors my father's. We are very glad to hear such a good account of your patients, little and great. My dear Iddy Dorkey's remembrance of me is very pleasing to me, foolishly pleasing, because I know it will be over so soon. My attachment to him will be more durable. I shall think with tenderness and delight on his beautiful and smiling countenance and interesting manner, until a few years have turned him into an ungovernable, ungracious fellow. The books from Winton are all unpacked and put away. The binding has compressed them most conveniently, and there is now good room in the bookcase for all that we wish to have there. I believe the servants were very glad to see us. Nanny was, I'm sure. She confesses that it was very dull, and yet she had her child with her till last Sunday. I understand that there are some grapes left, but I believe not many. They must be gathered as soon as possible, or this rain will entirely rot them. I am quite angry with myself for not writing closer. Why is my alphabet so much more sprawly than yours? Dame Tilbury's daughter has lain in. Shall I give her any of your baby clothes? The laceman was here only a few days ago. How unfortunate for both of us that he came so soon. Dame Bushel washes for us only 1 week more, as Suki has got a place. John Stephen's wife undertakes our purification. She does not look as if anything she touched would ever be clean, but who knows? We do not seem likely to have any other maidservant at present, but Dame Staples will supply the place of one. Mary has hired a young girl from Ash who has never been out to service to be her scrub, but James fears her not being strong enough for the place. Earl Harwood has been to Dean lately, as I think Mary wrote us word, and his family then told him that they would receive his wife if she continued to behave well for another year. He was very grateful, as well he might. Their behavior throughout the whole affair has been particularly kind. Earl and his wife live in the most private manner imaginable at Portsmouth, without keeping a servant of any kind. What a prodigious innate love of virtue she must have to marry under such circumstances. It is now Saturday evening, but I wrote the chief of this in the morning. My mother has not been down at all today. The laudanum made her sleep a good deal, and upon the whole I think she's better. My father and I dined by ourselves. How strange! He and John Bond are now very happy together, for I have just heard the heavy step of the ladder along the passage. James Digweed called today, and I gave him his brother's deputation. Charles Harwood, too, has just called to ask how we are, in his way from Dummer, whither he has been conveying Miss Garrett, who is going to return to her former residence in Kent. I will leave off, or I shall not have room to add a word tomorrow. Sunday. My mother has had a very good night and feels much better today. I have received my aunt's letter and thank you for the scrap. I will write to Charles soon. Pray give Fanny and Edward a kiss from me, and ask George if he has got a new song for me. 'Tis really very kind of my aunt to ask us to Bath again, a kindness that deserves a better return than to profit by it. Yours ever, Jane Austen. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you have a very good week.